Open the podcast bay door as hell.
Hello everyone, and welcome to episode 126 of Welcome to Geektown. I'm your host, Kurt Onstead. I've been a proud geek all my life, being into role-playing games, board games, sci-fi, fantasy, and especially superheroes and comics. And I want to help others join me in those pursuits, but I've found that sometimes people can get overwhelmed or feel left out because they don't already have what some consider the requisite knowledge to be considered a fan. And that's where Welcome to Geektown comes in. Here you can ask your questions without feeling like a gatekeeper is calling you out for not yet being fully versed in every aspect of your new interest. I'm doing something a little different this episode. Starting next week, I'll be doing a deep dive on the She-Hulk show on Disney+, since she's one of my favorite characters and the show looks to be a lot of fun with plenty of comic book connections and references. To help you prepare for that, I'm doing a rerun of an older show, specifically episode 38, where I went into She-Hulk's origin and important events. But since it's been almost 3 years since that was written and recorded, I'll be adding an addendum to go over her more recent changes. A small note, I no longer have the original audio from that recording, so you'll hear a little bit of a jump as I edited out a promo for a service that is no longer in business. Hopefully it's not too noticeable or distracting. Anyway, let's get to it. Take it away, Kurt from 2019. Today's question is about one of the characters that was announced as joining the MCU in Disney Plus's slate of shows coming out in the next couple of years. Specifically, Michelle K. writes, quote, "I just found out She-Hulk is an actual character in the Marvel Universe. This is the first I've heard of her. What is her origin? What are the best storylines? I was a huge Incredible Hulk TV show fan as a kid, and often wished there was a female version so I could play it." Well, Michelle, I do mention She-Hulk back in episode 8, where I talk about comic book characters who break the fourth wall. But we'll go into a lot more detail here on how She-Hulk got her start and the ups and downs of her long, storied career. She-Hulk's first appearance was in Savage She-Hulk #1 in February 1980, written by Stan Lee, with art by John Buscema. Thus, these two have co-creator credit. At the time the book was released, CBS was airing the Incredible Hulk television show, and the executives at Marvel were afraid that the showrunners would introduce a female version of the Hulk on TV, like the Bionic Woman had been introduced after the success of the $6 Million Man, and wanted to make sure that the rights to such a character belonged to Marvel. And her origins sound like something that could be straight out of an episode of the show. Jennifer Walters is the daughter of LA County Sheriff William Morris Walters, who had run afoul of local mobsters. Jennifer, who works as an attorney in Los Angeles, is shot and critically wounded by said mobsters. But, fortunately for her, her cousin on her mom's side, Bruce Banner, is visiting her. Knowing that they have the same blood type, and with time being of the essence, Bruce transfuses his blood into Jen to keep her alive. As I'm sure you all know, Bruce Banner is better known as the Hulk, and so his blood has a similar effect on Jennifer. When mobsters show up at the hospital to finish the job, Jen hulks out and easily takes him out. She-Hulk eventually takes down the crime boss that ordered the hit. All of the issues of Savage She-Hulk, after the first, were written by David Anthony Kraft and drawn by Mike Vosberg. Similar to her cousin, Jen's transformations are originally triggered by anger. And as you would expect with a title like Savage She-Hulk, she was portrayed as a monosyllabic creature of rage. However, within a year, Jen is able to control her transformations and retains her intelligence while in her She-Hulk form. With her immense strength and Amazonian good looks, albeit green, Jen decides to stay as She-Hulk basically all the time, although she can still change at will when she wants or needs to. This is the status quo when Savage She-Hulk ends at issue number 25. After her first solo run, She-Hulk joins the Avengers for a little while, then replaced The Thing in the Fantastic Four when he decided to stay on Battleworld at the end of the 1985 Secret Wars miniseries. Most of her tenure in the Fantastic Four, as well as some of her Avengers appearances, were written and drawn by John Byrne, who has become the creator who had the greatest impact on the portrayal of Jennifer Walters and her Emerald alter ego. During She-Hulk's membership in the Fantastic Four, Jennifer was exposed to radiation while trying to prevent a leak in a crashed SHIELD helicarrier. This exposure apparently led Jen to become stuck as She-Hulk permanently for some time, although this didn't bother her as that was her preferred form anyways. When Ben Grimm returned from Battleworld, Jennifer rejoined the Avengers. Then, it was in 1989 that She-Hulk finally got her own solo title again, and it's this book that changed things for Jennifer forever. Titled Sensational She-Hulk number 1, both written and drawn by John Byrne, it was in this book that Jen is first shown to be aware of the fact that she is a comic book character. In this run, and concurrent guest appearances, She-Hulk will talk directly to the reading audience, the author, and occasionally appeal to the editor to rein in the silliness. Sensational She-Hulk was primarily a humor book, mocking many tropes of the comic book medium and the industry itself. Although John Byrne is primarily associated with the book, he wrote and drew less than half of the run, and others, including Howard the Duck creator Steve Gerber, British writer Simon Furman, best known for his work on the Transformers comics, and now superstar artist Brian Hitch, all contributed their own unique touches to the series. One of my favorite bits from this run is near the beginning of the series, when Jennifer meets another character with comic awareness, Louise Mason, who was a real Golden Age superhero named the Blonde Phantom. She had arranged for She-Hulk to work in the same office as her so that Louise would stop aging, as comic book characters that are in ongoing series don't do so, but do age when off-panel, as demonstrated by characters like Submariner staying the same age, while lesser-known World War II era characters reappear briefly only to be shown aged and then die. This is a typical example of the sort of storytelling devices that Byrne and the other writers would draw a satirical eye to over the 5 years the book was published. After Sensational She-Hulk was eventually cancelled, during the comic book crash of the mid-90s, Jennifer spent some time in comic book limbo herself, making appearances in Heroes for Hire, Fantastic Force, and occasionally in the Avengers. During this period, Jen's fourth wall breaking is rarely, if ever, referenced, as the storylines she's involved in are more serious. She eventually becomes a full-time Avenger again, shortly before the events of Avengers Disassembled. In this storyline, which was a prelude to House of M, a story I've mentioned a number of times, starting as far back as episode 2, there are a number of Avengers who are seemingly killed or grievously wounded. She-Hulk, unknowingly under the influence of the Scarlet Witch, reverts to a more savage form and ends up tearing Vision in half. It eventually takes the Hulk himself to bring his cousin down and allow her to control herself again. This leads into She-Hulk's next ongoing series, released in 2004, titled simply She-Hulk, which ran for 8 issues, then took 8 months off, and was rebooted as Volume 2, keeping the same creative team. The book was written primarily by Dan Slott, who later went on to write a celebrated run on Amazing Spider-Man, with art by a number of artists, although Juan Bobillo drew the entire first volume plus the first few issues of the second, so deserves special notice for creating the look of the book. With psychological counseling and some technological help, Jennifer is able to once again control her transformation into the Jade Giantess, but is learning to spend more time as non-powered lawyer Jennifer Walters, as part of the agreement with her new firm is that while she is on the clock, that she will not Hulk out. The law firm she's hired by, named Goodman, Lieber, Kurtzberg, and Holloway, appropriately enough specializes in superhuman law. If some of those names sound familiar, that's with good reason, although it's also understandable if they don't ring a bell. Martin Goodman was the first publisher at Marvel Comics, and then Lieber and Kurtzberg are the last names that Stan Lee and Jack Kirby were born with, respectively. Holloway is a character in the book and not named for any real-world Marvel royalty. If I had my way, it's this run specifically that Marvel would draw most of their inspiration from when creating the show. Think Ally McBeal or The Practice with superheroes. Bizarre legal cases that can only come from a world where clones, parallel universes, frequent resurrections, and other sci-fi tropes are a constant, mixed in with personal stories about Jennifer and the rest of the legal team, which includes an android office worker and a shape-shifting process server, among other unique characters. During this run, the title tied into many of the big crossovers, including Civil War, where she acted as Speedball's attorney after the Stamford tragedy, and World War Hulk, where she once again fought her cousin after his return from being exiled in space. Another important event that takes place around this time is Tony Stark using some tech to remove Jen's powers permanently without her permission. Through some unique circumstances, she does eventually get them back, but while depowered, Jen sues Tony for this violation. Peter David took over the book in the last year of its publication. Jennifer was disbarred due to revealing privileged information, but continued to work for the law firm, albeit in their bail bond division as a bounty hunter, paired with a disguised Skrull named Jacinda. The two travel across the country in a motorhome as Jen comes to grips with her anger at Tony Stark for what he did to her. During this time and afterwards, She-Hulk is also used as a supporting cast member in the Hulk book. Unfortunately, the two writers did not coordinate, and some contradictions arose between the two. The Hulk was the more popular one at the time, which may have been part of the reason She-Hulk did get cancelled. Jen once again spent some time in comic book limbo, and another character took on the She-Hulk moniker for a while. Her name is Lyra, and her backstory is complicated, but to make a long story short, she's the daughter of the Hulk and a woman from an alternate future named Thundra, who was raised in that alternate future where women have taken over. Her tenure as She-Hulk did not last long, and has since been exiled to Weird World, a little-used alternate Earth. Jennifer shows back up in Civil War II, where she's grievously wounded by Thanos at the beginning of the story. She spends much of the miniseries in a coma, and when she does eventually wake, her powers have changed once again. Instead of her toned green form that she could change into at will, Jen now only transforms when angry or afraid, much as she did in her first Savage She-Hulk appearances, and now appears as incredibly muscular with gray skin covered with glowing green scars, and is much more menacing than she was in any of her previous appearances. Her brief solo title during this time was simply titled Hulk, since one of the other big events of Civil War II was the death of Bruce Banner. There was no competition for the title. He does get better, of course. I'm sure we'll cover that in a future Death Becomes You installment one day. Running for 11 issues, written by Mariko Tamaki, this book had more of a horror vibe compared to the more lighthearted adventures she had been on during most of her solo stories. That finally brings us up to the present day. Jen is once again spending most of her time as She-Hulk and is back in the Avengers. However, her personality is much closer to the traditional Hulk, as she tends to be fairly monosyllabic and speak in the third person. Much of her time on the Avengers during this current run, She-Hulk has been in a relationship with Thor, Odin's son, not Jane Foster. Although Thor's status quo has just changed with the end of the War of the Realms storyline, so we'll have to see if that continues to be the case going forward. Jen's actually spent much of her time in various romantic relationships, including, among others, Star Fox, John Jameson, J. Jonah's son, Tony Stark, S.H.I.E.L.D. agent Clay Quartermain, and Hercules. She was even shown to have slept with the X-Men villain Juggernaut in an issue of the X-Men, but Dan Slott retconned that to be the Jennifer of an alternate world. Unfortunately, due to this focus on her love life, I'm betting many of the issues chronicling Jennifer's story would not pass the Bechdel test. But other than that, She-Hulk is a strong feminist icon as a powerful, independent woman who combines brain and brawn, most of the time, and has stepped out from the shadow of her more famous cousin to become a popular character in her own right. I'm really looking forward to continuing to read her adventures, as well as seeing her in live action, starting sometime in the next couple of years. Since this episode is aired, Jennifer has gone through a couple of major events, most of which happened with her in the same oversized body last mentioned. Interestingly, while she talked like a typical Hulk during this period, her thought balloons were shown to be much more intelligent than her outward demeanor would suggest. The first key moment happened during the Empire storyline, when She-Hulk was killed and her body was infested by a sentient plant race called the Kotati, who pretended to be her during their war against the Earth in order to have a spy on the Avengers. However, at the same time in the Hulk book, the leader had taken over the Green Door, a special portal that allows gamma-mutated creatures to come back to life, and upon returning, Jen burned the Kotati out of her system and helped repel their invasion of Earth at a battle in Wakanda. Shortly thereafter, the Avengers discovered plans for the Russians to kidnap Jennifer, while at the same time the rogue state had their eye on Atlantis. In order to try to find out what those plans were, Jennifer allowed herself to be kidnapped, hoping to discover their goals while on the inside. She was taken by the Winter Guard, Russia's own super team, and then tortured while being exposed to massive doses of radiation in an attempt to brainwash her. Physically, she became even larger and her skin turned red, but she fought off the mental conditioning for quite some time. Eventually, the Avengers showed up to free her, but by that point she was nearly mindless and seemed to break free after fighting both the Winter Guard and the Avengers. From there, it seemed she was following the programming that she had received during her torture sessions and went to Atlantis where she was supposed to assassinate Namor. However, that programming was merely a way for the Red Widow, leader of the Winter Guard, to be able to set off a nuclear warhead in Atlantis and put the blame on She-Hulk, who Red Widow referred to as the Winter Hulk, similar to the Winter Soldier. The Russians wanted to start a war between Atlantis and America by blaming the explosion on She-Hulk. Thankfully, Jennifer actually remained in control and took down the Red Widow, grabbed the nuclear device, and set it off a safe distance away from Atlantis, absorbing all the radiation into herself. She returned to Avengers headquarters, where she expelled much of the radiation, which not only reverted her back to her more usual status quo, but also cured the infestation of Avengers Mountain that had occurred near the beginning of this Winter Hulk storyline. Jen, starring in the 4th volume of the She-Hulk title, is once again able to choose to be either a regular human or her more superheroic self, and has gone back to work as a lawyer, although she's working for her former rival Mallory Book and is treated poorly by her boss in this new position. Only a few issues have come out so far, mostly focusing on a mystery involving the seemingly back from the dead Jack of Hearts. However, a subplot I hope to see more of is Jennifer's agreement with Titania, soon to be played by Jamila Jamil on the show, to basically have a superhero fight club, where the two, and maybe others if I get my way, can safely fight each other and blow off some steam. It's an idea that hasn't been seen much in the Big Two, but it makes total sense and would be especially fun with a character like She-Hulk. In the meantime, we've got the She-Hulk show starting next week, and as I said at the beginning, I'll be doing a deep dive into that, simply because I love the character so much. I'll be joined by Andy Wilson of the Kiss Your Franchise Goodbye podcast. So come back next Sunday for the first of that 9-week series. But don't forget to write in with your questions for regular episodes. Just send an email to welcome2geektown, all spelled out, @gmail.com. Or you can ask anonymously by filling out the form at welcome2, the number 2 in this case, geektown.com. Other contact options include facebook.com/welcome-to-geektown or Twitter @geektownpodcast. Also, if you'd like to support the show directly, come join the Patreon at patreon.com/welcome-to-geektown for just $1 per month to get access to full scripts of the shows, audio outtakes, and a monthly shoutout. You can also help the show grow by subscribing and giving a 5-star review over on Apple Podcasts to join the Geektown City Council, which helps other people find the show so we can all tell them, welcome to Geektown, population, us. Welcome to Geektown is written, narrated, edited, and produced by me, Kurt Onstead. Theme music is by Aaron Levitz, logo art by Archie Santana. All other sound clips of the copyrighted material, their respective owners, and no infringement is intended, falling under fair use.